Hey, welcome to our first unit, which is on literary theory. Basically, literary theory gives you the tools that you're able to analyze, as mentioned in the previous video, pretty much anything and everything. It doesn't just have to apply to literary works, although oftentimes literature is where these are used often, but you can easily take these and apply these to yet again, pretty much everything. I'll be looking over to the side here because I have my other computer with a list of those, so I make sure that I don't miss out any. Definitely for this unit, look through these, look through the key terms, look through the examples as well, and then take the quiz and then post on the theory discussion forum your thoughts about one of the theories. So the first one is likely easily the easiest of all of them, and that's gender theory. Basically, the idea of gender theory is that gender is a construct. As long as you think about that, everything else comes into play. Basically, that masculine and feminine is all dependent on time and the place. You can easily look at this as you think about the colors that you associate with little kids. Blue for boys, pink for girls. However, you go back a couple hundred years and that blue was actually a feminine color and pink was actually a masculine color. Blue was tied to the Virgin Mary, pink was a off shade of red. You look at different cultures and the way that men and women are presented and how they're seen in society differs, which that gets into yet again with gender theory, that everything's a construct. So now, the other thing with it, it gets into also the different waves of feminist movement too. First wave was all about the women's right to vote, women's suffrage. Second wave was rah rah, more women power, plus also making things better in the workplace. The third wave feminist movement, the latest one that we're still seeing today, it's brought into more the GBLT. As well as just fighting more towards equality, with at the same time not saying that women were being objectified all the time, instead that women can easily have power even in roles that the second wave feminists saw as objectification. A case in point would be an exotic dancer, where the first wave would say, give her the right to vote. Second wave would be like, oh my, she's being taken advantage of by the guys as she's being objectified. The third wave would look at her and say, wow, look at her. She's completely manipulating the men as she dances and takes their money. So those are things to think about with the gender theory. Yet again, this is one of the easiest ones because, and you see this time and again in the fairy tales. Two terms definitely to hold on to: passive and active agency. Passive is all the actions being done to that person. Active agency, that person's doing all the action. So if, for example, that some person came in here and threw a water bottle at me and I was sitting right here and the water bottle hit me, that would be, I would be passive. The person throwing it would be active, which here on a Saturday with no one else, so I should be safe. The other thing would be public and private sphere, where the public would be everything outside the domestic realm or outside of the house, and which was stereotypically was the men's world. Meanwhile, the private sphere was inside the house, which stereotypically was the woman's world. Things are shaking up, definitely. So the stereotypes with gender are not always there. And you can actually probably tie this to some of the feminist movements as we are working towards more equality. And then moving on to the next literary theory, that's Marxist theory. Basically, everything's tied to class and power. So you look at that, and everything, of course, has some kind of term, some kind of value that's attached to it. You can look at commodity fetishism, where you take a shirt from, say, Target, and compare it to a shirt from Dolce & Gabbana, where the first shirt might be like $10, $15. The second shirt could easily be close to $400. Seriously, check out their website. It's unreal. But then again, using Marxism, I come from a middle-class background, so the idea of spending $400 for a t-shirt is outlandish to me. Same with when they're on sale and they're only $125. Still a little bit pricey for a t-shirt for me. No offense to anyone that might go for those. So also, you look at the different elements of power. You get dominant, which would be the person that's currently in power. Will use politics right now. So say Barack Obama with the White House. You would have residual, the person that was in power beforehand. So you'd go with Bush and Clinton, where there's still elements of their reign that are in the system itself, but they're not the current force. And then you look at the emergent powers, and those would be the people that would be working towards becoming the dominant power. So that would get into Hillary Clinton, for an example, or Rubio, or Paul Ryan, Chris Christie, although the whole Bridgegate thing is going to knock him down quite a bit. Even down to, say, our governor, Brownback, whose eyes are definitely on the White House. He's ran once before. He's likely wanting to run again. So that's pretty much Marxism in a nutshell. Yet again, go through the terms. You'll see the different components of it. And you'll be able to apply. Yet these two are probably the easiest, but New Historicism is also pretty easy as well. This is where nothing escapes the time in which it was created, which pretty much gives us the ability in this class to look at the fairy tales and say Brothers Grimm, and it gives us a portal of sorts into the 19th century to get an idea of what they saw as value or their values at that time, as well as the way that men and women were portrayed. Where New Historicism, a good example, one of the big, Greenblatt, one of the big theorists in this area, talks about Shakespeare a lot, and how Shakespeare was not sexist with the way that he portrayed his women. He was just really a man of his time. So that's a big thing about New Historicism. Thing to keep in mind is not to place modern values on texts of the past, but instead just identify those different components. Next one, post-colonial theory. This is basically the way with colonization, when a little country of good old Britain took over pretty much the majority of the world. And that's a lot of the inspiration of this, and looking at after colonization, what had happened to the cultures, and their effects. You also get Said's famous work, Orientalism, with the way that the Western cultures look towards the Middle East and the stereotypes that they bring forward. Aladdin, definitely, the Disney movie, great example that you can use post-colonial theory, especially when you start looking at the heroes in there that look extremely American. Meanwhile, the villains look more on the stereotypical sort of Middle Eastern. So run with it with an analysis. You can easily. This would also get into the ways that post-colonialists would call natives of America and their treatment during the colonization. Same with the Aboriginals in Australia. Next one is postmodern and post-structuralism. This is the one that can completely blow your mind. Plus, it also gives us the ability to use these other literary theories. Roland Barthes wrote an essay that was called Death of the Author, which basically meant that once the author published a book or published a source, and once it was out of his or her hands, then the author had as much say about the work as anyone else did. And that meant that we no longer had to turn back to the whole idea that whatever the author says, that is actually the meaning behind the text. Instead, the author really could say anything. Good example of this would be J.K. Rowling. When she released her last Harry Potter book, a couple months later she said that Dumbledore was gay. It was all sorts of craziness, led to more book sales, which is probably, using Marx's sort of thoughts, that was what she was after. But if someone were to ask, is Dumbledore gay, it's really up to the reader to decide. You could make an argument for it, you could also make an argument against it. And that's because we're in postmodernism, so J.K. Rowling has as much authority as any of the other readers out there. So it's extremely fascinating. Also, basically with postmodernism, we get to the point that we're just kind of tired of the same thing. So you'll see this when we get to Little Red Riding Hood with Roald Dahl, with the changes there, or even James Thurber's, where Little Red Riding Hood, she knows what's going on. She's been thinking all the things that you've been thinking as well about how a wolf really doesn't look like Grandma. So you get into those sort of changes. You also get into intertextuality. The song that pretty much or the moment that I finally clicked with me with postmodernism when I was watching Moulin Rouge, the movie that people either love or they hate. Regardless, check out the song Elephant Love Medley from Moulin Rouge. And the whole lyrics are all a whole bunch of other lyrics from previous love songs. So they took these lyrics and then created something new with it. And so with the idea of postmodernism, same with intertextuality, you can take those lyrics, they will take you back to those songs. So you'll hear Dolly Parton's I Will Always Love You, or Whitney Houston's I Will Always Love You, whichever version you want to go with. But at the same time, it's something new. Think also like Shrek, the movie Shrek with the fairy tales. That's another good example of postmodernism. And they really were meaning to go with the idea of postmodernism because they have the whole scene about the onion, and that's one of the critiques about postmodernism, that you keep on pulling back the layers and there's nothing there. Also, the idea of postmodernism is that there really is nothing there. The concept of the hyperreal is into Baudrillard, with the idea that Walt Disney World, the realest thing there is actually the parking lot, and the only reason that Disney World is successful is because we can look at it and try to convince ourselves that everything else is real. Yet again, this can play with your mind greatly. And then you get into the last one with psychoanalytic theory. Psychoanalytic gets more into first the thoughts of Freud, but then it gets into Lacan, where everything has a complex psychology to it. Same with characters in the text. You can start analyzing those characters, looking for different components of their characteristics and how these could possibly have formed from previous things or previous elements that have happened to them. If you've seen the movie Tangled, it's great for analyzing for psychoanalytic theory, just mainly with the way of her youth and before she was kidnapped, and then after she was kidnapped, when she's realizing all these different pieces that come together. And you can have a field day, definitely, watching that movie and using psychoanalytic theory. The big thing with psychoanalytic theory, you do get into the orders, the symbol. Well, actually, you get into the imaginary order, which basically, sorry, as I pull up the orders here, yeah, the imaginary, and that's when the baby is born, and where the baby actually thinks that he or she has complete control and power, because whenever the baby cries, people come and rescue and help out the baby. Then the baby goes through the mirror stage when the baby realizes that I'm just a baby and pretty defenseless. And instantly the baby goes into the symbolic order, which the symbolic order is what we are all in, where we have words and names. For an example, I could say those are books behind me, or you could say it's a mess. Sorry, I need to work on that. It's all these different ideas, different labels. Every once in a while you get to a thing that you don't really have the right label for, and it can cause people to go a little bit crazy. And that's when you're dealing with the real, things that are outside the symbolic order. Imagine you're walking down the road and this bus comes out of nowhere, and you throw up your hands, and you have that moment of shock that you think you're going to die. You don't, but you can say, oh, my life flashed before my eyes, or I was in complete shock. It doesn't quite capture that feeling that you had, though. That's because that brief moment you had with the real. September 11th would be a good example of this as well, when the planes flew into the buildings and how people just repeatedly watched it over and over and over until it seemed less real, which then put it more into symbolic order because it was beyond words. It was something that completely went against their whole idea of what society was like and put them into a shock of sorts. Those are the literary theories in a nutshell. Read through the text, you'll get more out of it. I look forward to the discussion forums, so I'll jump in there too. And yeah, pick out. Usually people gravitate towards one of those theories. You will use one of these theories for a later paper that you'll have in this. So start thinking as you go through the text of applying these different ideas to them. So, and yet again, if you need anything at all, let me know. I'm here to help. Okay. I will see you later.